A little girl was curled up on a frozen bench, whispering to a stranger in the snow. "Are you the miracle?" What he did next changed 3 lives forever. But this isn't a fairy tale. There's no Santa Claus, no magic wand. Just a lonely CEO, a single mother with nothing left, and a child who still believed that faith could melt even the coldest night in New York. The story began with a coat, but what it led to was a family. If you've ever believed that kindness can change a life, if you've ever wished for a real-world miracle, watch until the very end. This story is for you. And don't forget to subscribe for more soul-stirring stories like this one. Snow came without warning. By the time Ethan Blake stepped out of the boardroom, the city was already wrapped in a thick, white silence. Snowflakes spiraled down in lazy dances, catching in the glow of the street lamps along Park Avenue. His black coat absorbed the cold, but he barely noticed it. Another deal closed. Another 8-figure merger inked. Another room full of suits shaking his hand like he was the god of numbers. He didn't feel anything. Not accomplishment, not pride, just noise. The driver was already waiting by the curb. As always, engine-humming leather seats warmed a bottled water with lemon in the cup holder, just the way Ethan preferred it. He paused with one foot off the curb, staring at the tinted window. And then, for reasons he didn't fully understand, he shook his head. "I'll walk," he muttered. The driver blinked. Sir Ethan didn't repeat himself, just turned and began walking down the avenue, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the snow. His leather shoes weren't made for this weather, but he didn't care. He just needed to move, to breathe, to feel something real for once. 10 minutes passed, 15. He turned off the main street down a quieter block near Lexington. That's when he saw her. A small figure curled up on a metal bench beneath a dimly flickering street lamp. The bench was old, half covered in snow, the kind you only see in neighborhoods the city forgot. She looked too small to be real, knees hugged tight to her chest, wrapped in a tattered adult-sized coat that nearly swallowed her whole. He stopped. She didn't notice him. Her head was tucked under the coat's collar, hair tangled and matted shoes soaked through. She couldn't have been older than 5. Ethan's heart stuttered. The cold suddenly felt sharper, more intrusive. He stepped closer slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you okay?" No response. Her breath was slow, shallow, lips tinged with blue. He crouched beside her, the snow soaking into the knees of his slacks. He reached out and tapped her shoulder lightly. Her eyes fluttered open wide, clear and startlingly calm. She blinked at him. "You're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was waiting." Ethan frowned. "Waiting for who?" "For you," she said, like it was obvious. "You're the miracle, right?" The word hit him like a slap. Miracle. He wasn't used to being seen that way. He wasn't used to being seen at all, really not as a person. Just a name, a number, a force on a screen or a magazine cover. But this girl, this tiny child trembling in the snow, said it like she knew something he didn't. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lily." "Hi, Lily," he said softly. "Where's your mom? She went to find dinner," Lily replied. "She said she'd be back before the snow covers my shoes." Ethan glanced down. The snow was already creeping over her tiny sneakers. "I don't think she meant this much snow," he said gently. "She'll come," Lily said with certainty. "She always comes." Ethan didn't know what to do. Call the cops? A shelter? What if they separated her from her mom? She shifted under the coat and pulled something from a small frayed backpack. It was a crumpled photograph, a young woman with tired eyes and a soft smile. "That's her," Lily said, holding the photo up. "Her name's Grace. She always smiles like that when she gets food." Ethan studied the photo. It was worn creased from being handled too often. Lily looked back at him. "Will you wait with me?" His throat tightened. The answer came before he could even think. "Yes," he said. "I'll wait." Without a word, he stood and pulled off his wool coat. He draped it gently over Lily's shoulders. She let out a soft sigh and curled into it like it was a cloud. He sat beside her on the bench, cold metal biting through his clothes. Snow fell around them in slow, silent waves. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan Blake felt still. They didn't speak much after that. Lily leaned against his side, tiny fingers clutching the edge of the coat. Every now and then she glanced up at him and smiled like she knew exactly who he was, even if he didn't yet. And Ethan just sat there in a world suddenly made smaller, quieter, warmer. The wind howled down the alley, but he barely noticed. All he saw was Lily. All he felt was that maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe he was meant to be there. Maybe this was the night everything would change. The soup was still warm, but barely. Grace Miller clutched the paper bag tighter against her chest as she hurried down the sidewalk, her breath sharp in the frigid air. Snow clung to her eyelashes. Her scarf was damp, her fingers numb. She'd been gone longer than she wanted, longer than she should have. But the line at the community kitchen had wrapped around the block, and by the time she made it inside, they were down to the last ladlefuls of rice porridge and one sad roll of bread. Still, she'd smiled, thanked the volunteers, and walked away without complaint. That was her rule: never beg, never cry. Just survive. Now every step she took toward the bus stop felt heavier. She turned the corner expecting to see Lily bundled in her coat, maybe curled asleep the way she sometimes did on colder nights. But what she saw instead made her heart slam against her ribs. There was a man sitting beside her daughter. He was tall, dark-coated, and too close. His shoulders hunched as he spoke quietly to Lily, who sat alert and calm, her tiny hands tucked into oversized sleeves. And she was smiling. Grace dropped the bag without thinking. "Lily," she shouted, her voice cutting through the snowy hush like a whip. She ran forward, boots slipping on the slush, and scooped her daughter into her arms. "Are you okay? Did he touch you? Did he hurt you?" Lily blinked up at her, blinking, as if waking from a dream. "No, Mommy. He's nice. He gave me his coat. He stayed with me." The man stood slowly, palms raised in surrender. "I'm not here to hurt her," he said, his voice low and steady. "I saw her alone. She was freezing. I just stayed." Grace took a step back, placing herself squarely between the man and Lily, who now rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "You don't get to touch a child just because they look cold," Grace said sharply. "I didn't touch her," the man replied. "I gave her my coat. I sat with her until you came." Grace studied him. His hair was damp with snow. He wore no jacket, just a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled slightly, cuffs wet. His eyes were tired, not slick or charming. Just present, unthreatening, but still too calm, too composed. "Who are you?" she asked, voice tight. He hesitated. Ethan Blake. I was just walking." Her breath caught at the name. It sounded vaguely familiar, but she pushed the thought aside. "Just walking?" "Through a snowstorm I needed to clear my head," he said simply. Grace didn't believe in coincidences, not anymore. Too many people had shown up offering help only to vanish or demand something in return. And yet Lily was no longer shivering. Her skin had color again. She clung to the wool coat like it was the warmest blanket in the world. "You can go now," Grace said, her tone final. Ethan nodded. "Of course, but please let her keep the coat. Just for tonight." Grace hesitated. The coat was thick, clean, expensive. She looked down at Lily now, nestled against her chest, her small hands gripping the fabric like it was spun from clouds. Her defenses cracked just a little. "You can stay," she said softly. "For now. Just don't try anything. I won't." Ethan said and slowly sat back down on the bench this time at a respectful distance. The snow continued to fall quiet and relentless. Grace sat too, pulling Lily close between them, wrapping her arms tightly around her daughter, as if to shield her from both the cold and the world. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then almost reluctantly, Grace said, "We sleep here sometimes. It's safer than most places." Ethan nodded, not pressing. "She told me." Grace gave him a sideways glance. "You just sat with her. She shouldn't have been alone," he said quietly. "Not in this kind of cold." There was something in the way he said it, simple, certain, without agenda, that made Grace pause. Still, she wrapped her coat tighter around herself, her back never fully relaxing. Trust wasn't something she gave away. It had to be earned. "I've met kind men before," she said, after a moment. "Kindness always has a price." "Not always," Ethan answered. She didn't reply. Her arms tightened around Lily. After a while, Ethan spoke again. "I'm staying at a hotel a few blocks from here. It's clean, warm. You and Lily could come, just for tonight." Grace tensed. "And then what? We wake up in debt? You expect gratitude, a favor?" "No." Ethan said, his voice calm but earnest. "You don't owe me anything." She laughed bitterly. "That's what they all say. Nothing is free. You're right to be careful," he said. "But this isn't charity. It's just human." That stopped her. She looked at him, truly looked, and for a brief second saw past the coatless figure and the businesslike calm. She saw exhaustion, loneliness, honesty. After a long silence, she said, "We'll go, but just for tonight." Ethan stood and nodded. He didn't smile, didn't push, just waited while she adjusted Lily in her arms, wrapping the coat tighter around the child like a shield. They walked together through the snow, their breaths forming clouds in the night. Lily stirred once, her voice sleepy but content. "I like him, Mommy," she whispered. "He makes the air feel warm." At the motel, Ethan spoke to the clerk quietly, asking for discretion, no names. He handed Grace a key, stepping back as he did. "You'll be safe here," he said. She hesitated, then looked him in the eye. "Thank you. Truly." He turned to leave, but felt a small tug at his sleeve. "Lily." She looked up, her eyes wide and steady. "Will you come back tomorrow? I still have more of the story to tell." Ethan crouched to her level, his chest tight. "I'll try," he said softly. "I'd like to hear it." Lily smiled, then ran back to Grace's side. As Ethan stepped out into the snow, he realized something strange. He didn't want the night to end. And for the first time in years, he had no idea why. Ethan Blake didn't sleep that night. He tried God, he tried. But his penthouse was too still, too quiet. The kind of silence that used to calm him now felt suffocating. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 47th floor apartment, looking out over a city blanketed in snow, and questions he couldn't shake. Lily's voice still echoed in his head. "You're the miracle, right?" She didn't say it like she was guessing. She said it like she knew. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking softly in the crystal glass, and sat on the edge of his leather sofa. But the scotch felt bitter. The cushions too stiff. Everything too empty. At 3:12 a.m., he called his assistant Carmen, knowing full well she'd be awake. Carmen was ex-military now, corporate precision. She never questioned his requests. "Need a quiet background check?" he said, his voice low. "Name's Grace Miller. Late 20s maybe? Single mom, daughter named Lily. Probably worked in food service. I don't want anything invasive. No red flags, just who she is." Carmen didn't ask why. She simply said, "You'll have it by noon." By 1:00 p.m., the file sat in his inbox. Grace Miller, 29. Former sous chef at a neighborhood bistro in Brooklyn. Restaurant closed during the pandemic. No criminal record. One eviction. Known to volunteer at soup kitchens and community shelters. No history of drug use. Clean, quiet, off the grid. No police involvement, no lawsuits, no debts. Just disappeared. Carmen's note at the bottom. Ethan stared at the screen. This wasn't some con. Grace wasn't running from anything. She was just surviving. That evening, he found himself standing across the street from a red brick community kitchen in Midtown. It was one of several quietly funded by his company's philanthropic wing. He'd approved the grant for this one himself 6 months ago on paper. But he'd never stepped foot inside. Not until now. Through the frosted glass, he saw her. Grace in a borrowed apron and a sweater 2 sizes too big, hair tied in a loose knot. She moved with quiet authority, chopping carrots, stirring a massive pot of soup, barking soft instructions to 2 younger volunteers who clearly deferred to her. But it wasn't just the movement. It was the way she was in that space. Present. Focused. Every action deliberate but never rushed. She washed her hands after each step. She tasted before serving. She made eye contact with the people in line, nodding, smiling, offering dignity in spoonfuls. She didn't know he was there, and somehow that made it more powerful. When the dinner rush faded, and the trays were finally empty, she sat for a moment on a crate in the corner, sipping tea from a paper cup, like it was the last comfort she could afford. That was when Ethan stepped inside. The door creaked as it closed behind him. Grace looked up sharply, startled, then narrowed her eyes. "You again," she said. "What are you doing here?" Ethan lifted both hands lightly. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You did." "I support this place," he said, gesturing around the kitchen, quietly. "I just wanted to see it, being used." Grace raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "And now you've seen." Ethan chuckled softly. "Yeah, I guess I have." She watched him warily, then turned back to her tea. "You're good at this," he added. She didn't respond right away. "Then, I used to be a cook. Before all this." He hesitated. "I could help, not as a handout, just maybe I could set something up, a small stipend, make it official." She looked at him then, hard, measured. "I'm not asking for charity." "It's not charity," Ethan said quietly. "It's recognition." That gave her pause. Slowly, she set down her tea. "I'll cook," she said at last. "But only if I do it on my terms." He smiled, a real one. Fair enough. That night, she stayed to prep for the next day, chopping onions, with almost meditative rhythm labeling storage containers with perfect block letters. Ethan lingered nearby, pretending to check emails, but mostly just watching her. It calmed him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Like order could be restored to the world, one simmering pot at a time. As she left through the back door, arms full of groceries from the donations bin, Ethan followed at a respectful distance. She didn't go straight home. Instead, she turned a corner and stopped beside an old man slumped in a doorway. His blanket was torn, beard crusted with snow. He shivered violently. Grace didn't hesitate. She knelt beside him, said something Ethan couldn't hear, then reached into her tote and pulled out a small container. Food, likely leftovers she'd packed for herself. Then she did something that made Ethan stop breathing. She took off her coat, the only one she had, the same too-big faded coat Lily had worn the night before, and she wrapped it gently around the old man's shoulders. "People shouldn't die cold," she murmured. "Not even if they've made mistakes." Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, hidden by the snowfall, watching this woman whose entire world had been reduced to borrowed aprons and paper cups, still giving more than anyone he knew. And for the first time in a long, long while, he remembered his mother. She'd been a nurse, kind, gentle, always sitting with the patients no one else would touch. Always saying kindness is only real if it costs you something. Grace didn't know she was being watched. And Ethan didn't realize until that very moment he didn't just want to help her. He needed her. It started with one question. "Do you mind if I join you?" Grace blinked at him, a half-empty pan of lentil stew in her hands. The kitchen was winding down for the night, the floor damp from mop streaks, the air thick with garlic and ginger. Ethan stood at the doorway, sleeves rolled, holding a stack of clean takeout containers. "I mean," he added quickly, "to deliver these. Like you do." Grace studied him for a beat, lips slightly parted in surprise. "You want to come with me to the alleyways, to the underpasses? I'd like to help." She tilted her head, skeptical. "You sure you won't ruin those shoes?" Ethan looked down at his polished brogues. "Honestly, probably." Grace smirked and tossed him a pair of rubber kitchen boots. "Then grab a box, Mr. Blake, and try not to look too rich." From that night on, it became a ritual. Each evening after the kitchen closed, Grace and Ethan packed up small meals, containers of soup, rice, soft bread, and ventured out into the city's forgotten corners. Alleys that smelled of old smoke, stairwells with cardboard walls, the backs of churches and abandoned lots where people tried to vanish. Grace walked like she belonged to these streets, not with pity, but purpose. She knelt in the snow without hesitation, placed food down with both hands, and met each person's eyes. Ethan followed at first, unsure what to do, unsure how to act. But over time, he learned. He learned that shame made people turn away. He learned that silence could speak louder than sermons. He learned that it mattered more to say, "Hi, good evening," than "I'm here to help." One night, as they ducked beneath a subway overpass, Ethan watched Grace hand a meal to a man who wouldn't even lift his head. Still, she crouched, gently placed the food beside him and whispered, "Be safe tonight." Then she stood and walked away without looking back. "Why do you always look at them like that?" Ethan asked when they reached the corner. "Even when they won't look at you." Grace's breath was visible in the cold. She paused. "Because someone needs to," she said. "I want them to know I see them, that they're still human." Ethan didn't answer, but something in him shifted. Their conversations deepened as the snow deepened. In the warm amber light of the kitchen between washing trays and labeling broth, they shared slivers of pasts neither of them had spoken aloud in years. Grace told him about her childhood, about a father who walked out a mother who worked 3 jobs and still came home smiling. About growing up in an apartment that always smelled like soup and soap. "I've been invisible most of my life," she said one night. "Guess that's why I notice people others don't." Ethan was slower to speak. But eventually he told her about his mother too, about the cancer that came fast and the silence that came after. She used to say, "Kindness is currency." I think I lost that part of me when I lost her. Grace nodded quietly. You didn't lose it. You just forgot where to spend it. One Thursday night, in a lull between shifts, Ethan accidentally spilled a pan of soapy water across the prep table. Grace yelped, jumping back with a laugh, water dripping from her apron. You're terrible at cleaning, she teased, tossing him a towel. I'm excellent at delegating, he shot back, grinning. Lily, sitting in the corner with crayons and her ever-growing collection of peppermint wrappers, giggled wildly. You two are weird, she announced. Grace rolled her eyes. Ethan shrugged. Lily beamed at him. You're Mr. Snowman now, Mr. Snowman. Yup, she said seriously, because you came with the snow, and you always bring the minty candies. Ethan laughed, then reached into his pocket and handed her one. Then I suppose I have a reputation to uphold. What he didn't tell Grace or Lily was what he had done that morning. While scanning reports from his foundation, he came across a listing, a small closed-down cafe in Midtown. Modest, sturdy, filled with potential. He hadn't even blinked. He bought it on the spot. But he didn't tell her. Not yet. That night, as Grace stirred a pot of mushroom barley soup, she said softly, You know, I miss real cooking, not just ladling portions. I mean, spices, recipes, something that smells like home. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. In that moment, he saw it clear as a blueprint in his mind. A warm kitchen, a chalkboard menu written in her looping hand, laughter echoing off brick walls. A space not just to feed, but to belong. He didn't say a word. But in his chest, the vision bloomed, and it already had a name, the hearth. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. Grace arrived early at the kitchen apron, slung over one shoulder. Arms full of groceries from a nearby food bank. Ethan had promised to stop by later with fresh herbs he'd found a local farm that delivered. Of course he had. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and yeast. A fresh batch of dough was rising under a tea towel, and Grace was chopping carrots with steady rhythm. It felt good. Safe. Then she heard his voice. It came from the front hallway just past the door she had left slightly ajar. We've finalized the purchase of the property. The hearth will open on schedule. Grace froze blade mid-slice. Ethan's voice was unmistakable. And yes, he continued calm and matter-of-fact. Keep the foundation's name on everything. No need to mention me. Grace still doesn't know. There was a pause, then a quieter voice, probably his assistant. You sure about this? It's a significant investment. Ethan's response was soft but sure. She deserves it. The knife slipped from Grace's hand and clattered against the cutting board. She stared down at the carrots, the rhythm gone, the warmth in her chest extinguished by a sharp, cold knot just beneath her ribs. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled. She knew that name. Ethan Blake. Of course she did. The CEO, the billionaire. The one whose face had once been plastered across Forbes with the headline, "The Coldest Mind on Wall Street." She remembered reading it in a clinic waiting room once, while Lily slept in her lap. She hadn't put the name together until now. But it all made sense, the quiet confidence, the tailored silence, the careful way he never talked about himself. He hadn't just found her. He'd been watching her. Grace stepped out of the kitchen just as Ethan turned the corner, ending the call. Their eyes met. He smiled automatically until he saw her face. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. His smile faltered. Grace, wait. You lied to me, she said, her voice flat but shaking. All this time, I didn't lie, Ethan said quickly. I just didn't tell you everything. That's not better. I wanted to be real around you, he said, stepping closer. Not the title, not the name, just me. She stepped back. Why, she demanded. Why didn't you tell me? Why help anonymously? Why stay? What did you think this was, a project? A redemption arc? Some billionaire's conscience cleanse? No. His voice cracked. That's not what this is. Then what is it, Ethan? She said. You made me feel like I mattered, like I earned the things you gave. But now I see it was all arranged, curated, like everything else in your life. His shoulders sagged. You weren't a project. You aren't. Grace's jaw clenched. You can give me every dollar in the world, Ethan, she whispered. But don't take my dignity. Don't make me feel like I needed saving just to earn your affection. That struck him harder than anything anyone had ever said. She turned, then pulled off her apron and walked out without another word. The door didn't slam, but it may as well have. That night, Ethan returned to his penthouse. The lights flicked on by motion sensor. The room was perfect, clean, elegant, expensive. But it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. He poured himself a drink, but the amber liquid burned going down. He stared out the window, the city below glittering like broken glass. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. For the next 3 days, Ethan moved like a ghost. At the office, meetings were rescheduled. Emails unanswered. Carmen asked twice if he was okay. He nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. Every morning he walked past the same bus stop where he'd first met Lily. The bench was always empty. Every evening he stopped outside the kitchen, but he never went in. There was no laughter inside, no warmth, no grace. The hearth building his secret gift sat untouched, cold, hollow, a gesture without a soul. Ethan tried to tell himself this had been about helping, about kindness, about doing something good with what he had. But deep down, he knew the truth. He hadn't stayed all those nights because of guilt or redemption. He had stayed because of her, because of the way she carried herself when the world gave her nothing, because of the way she served others with dignity when no one served her, because of the quiet, steady fire inside her that made him want to be more than just rich, made him want to be real. Ethan sat in the dark and whispered to no one. I didn't save her. He looked up at the ceiling, then closed his eyes. She saved me. And suddenly being alone felt heavier than it ever had before. The kitchen smelled like ginger and broth. It reminded Ethan of warmth, of grace, of the quiet steadiness she carried into every corner of this place, of the way Lily's laughter used to echo off these walls. But tonight, as he stepped through the back door, alone, coat dusted with snow, everything felt dimmer. No one greeted him. No one spoke. The clatter of pots had quieted to a hum. The few volunteers glanced his way and said nothing. They knew who he was now. Everyone did. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He just walked to the far end of the kitchen where the counter met the prep table, the same place where he'd once spilled water and laughed for the first time in years. He sat down on the worn stool quietly and waited for what he wasn't sure. Then, like she'd always done, Grace appeared. Her apron was flour-dusted, her hair tied back in a messy knot. Her hands were full, carrying a steaming bowl of soup. She saw him, but didn't flinch. She didn't turn back. Instead, she walked straight to him. No greeting, no anger, just silence. She placed the bowl in front of him carefully. Her voice was low. Eat, she said. I added extra ginger. It's cold out. Ethan blinked. His fingers reached for the spoon like it might burn him, but he didn't lift it. Not yet. "I don't know when it started," he said, his voice barely above the hum of the fridge behind them. "Maybe it was that first night when you wrapped your coat around that man in the alley. Or when I saw you feed 30 strangers before you ever made yourself a cup of tea." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Or maybe it was when you laughed, even though I knew you hadn't slept in 2 days." Grace didn't move. Her hands rested on the edge of the counter, fingers curled tight. But somewhere along the way, Ethan said slowly, "I stopped coming here to help." A pause. "I came here because I needed you." Her lips parted, but no words came. Ethan pressed on, afraid to stop now. "I know I handled it wrong. I should have told you who I was. But for once in my life, I just wanted to be Grace. Not perform, not negotiate, not own anything. Just show up." She looked away, blinking fast. He continued, voice quiet but certain. "Nothing else tastes right anymore. Not without you. Not without this. The kitchen, the noise, your voice. You made me remember what real feels like." Grace swallowed hard. Her voice was barely audible when she finally spoke. "Then don't leave again." Ethan froze. "I never needed someone to bring me miracles," she said softly. "I just needed someone who'd stay, even when it's hard, especially then." For a moment, time stilled. The steam from the soup curled between them like breath in winter air. Ethan stood slowly, stepping around the counter until he was in front of her. He didn't reach for her. Not yet. "I'm staying," he said. "Not out of guilt, not to fix anything, but because you are the one thing I didn't know I was missing." Finally, his hand reached forward just a few inches and landed gently on the edge of the table between them. Grace looked down at it. Then, without hesitation, she placed her hand over his. Their fingers intertwined. No more speeches were needed. No more defenses. Behind them, a small head peeked around the corner. Mommy Lily's voice chirped. "I told you he'd come back." They both turned as Lily sprinted toward them, her pigtails bouncing. She threw her arms around Ethan's leg and looked up, beaming. "Hi, Mr. Snowman." He crouched and smiled. "Hi, Lily." She held out a peppermint in her palm. "I saved the last one for you." Ethan took it with a lump in his throat. As Grace knelt beside them, Lily threw her arms around both of them in a peppermint-scented hug. The soup sat forgotten on the counter. But no one felt hungry anymore. That night they walked home together. The snow had stopped. The city glowed under fresh light storefronts, flickering windows fogged with warmth. Lily skipped ahead, humming to herself, scarf dragging in the slush. Ethan looked sideways at Grace. "Do you still think I bought that building for me?" She smiled faintly. "No. But you still think I was trying to fix you?" She stopped, turned to him. "No," she said again. "I think you were trying to fix yourself. And somehow we just collided." He exhaled long and slow. "I'm not good at this. At what not being in control." Grace reached out, brushing snow from his collar. "Maybe that's the point," she said. He smiled. "Yeah, maybe it is." As they continued down the block, Ethan slipped his hand into hers. She didn't pull away. And in that small, quiet gesture, warmer than any fire, more honest than any promise, they began again. Together. The next morning, Ethan didn't go to the office. Instead, he walked with Grace and Lily to the tiny one-bedroom shelter apartment they'd been assigned through a last-minute voucher from the church nearby. The space was barely large enough to turn around in. but Grace had managed to make it feel like home. 2 mugs with chipped handles, a tiny vase with a dried sprig of lavender, and one drawing from Lily, taped proudly on the wall, a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands under falling snow. Ethan stood in the doorway, a moment longer than necessary, unsure if he belonged inside. Grace noticed. "You can come in," she said. "But I'm not making you coffee. Ours tastes like regret." He smiled. "I've had worse. Wall Street espresso machines are just sadness in disguise." Lily giggled from the floor where she was organizing her peppermints into rows by color. Later that day, Ethan found himself walking through Midtown alone. Not as the man in tailored suits with a private driver, but just Ethan's scarf wrapped too loosely, hands buried in his pockets, mind tangled. He passed the hearth, the building he had purchased in secret, the space meant to be a gift. It sat there, beautiful in structure but hollow in soul, its empty windows catching sunlight but reflecting nothing back. He stood outside it for a long time, then he walked away. That evening, back at the kitchen, Grace handed him a folded list. "What's this?" he asked. "A shopping list?" "The pantry's low, also the soup pot leaks again. And the fridge hums like it's dying." He smiled. "And you're giving this to me because you're still pretending you're not on the board of the foundation that funds this place." "Might as well be useful." Ethan grinned. "So now I'm the grocery boy. You wish Blake? You're the repair guy, the late shift dishwasher, and sometimes when I'm feeling generous, you get promoted to onion chopper. That's too much power for one man." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Don't let it go to your head." That night they walked again. Not to serve meals, not to save anyone, but simply to see, to remember, to be reminded of how fragile and beautiful people are when they're seen without shame. They stopped by an old church stoop where Grace used to leave extra blankets. Ethan gently placed a folded coat beside a sleeping man and didn't say a word. As they turned the corner, he looked over at her. "I used to think helping people meant fixing them." Grace nodded. "That's because you were taught to control, not to connect." He looked down. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," she said. "But it's worth it." One afternoon, as they prepped early for the weekend meals, Grace caught him standing in front of the stove, completely still, holding a wooden spoon over a pot of marinara sauce. Oh, she said. "You broke again?" Ethan looked over slowly. "Smells like my mom's." Grace's expression softened. She was a good cook. She was a nurse, worked long shifts. But Sunday afternoons, she always made pasta from scratch. She'd hum while she stirred. I used to sit on the floor and just listen to her breathe. Grace said nothing. Ethan didn't need her to. He continued stirring the pot this time with more care. Like maybe in that simple motion, something of her still lived. They began to build rituals that had nothing to do with money. Late-night tea by the back door where the cold helped them speak honestly. Tiny meals with too much garlic made for one another, not for others. A list on the fridge of things to try. Grace's were dishes. Ethan's were feelings. He wrote uncertainty at the top. She crossed it out and replaced it with trust. One night, Grace sat beside him on the bench outside the shelter. Lily was asleep upstairs, worn out from an afternoon of chasing pigeons and rearranging the pantry by smell. Grace leaned back and looked up at the sky. "You're different now," she said. "How so?" "You sit still longer." Ethan chuckled. "That's not very poetic. It is to me." They sat in silence for a while. Then Ethan turned to her. "What would you do?" he asked, "if you could build something? Anything you wanted?" Grace blinked. "Like a place, yeah, I'd build a kitchen. Not just a soup line, a real kitchen. Where people learn, cook, eat together. No labels, just food and laughter. Ethan smiled slowly. Would you let me help build it? Grace looked at him long and steady. I'd let you wash dishes in it, she said, and that was her way of saying yes. That night, as the first real spring breeze floated into the city, Ethan walked home alone. Not to his penthouse, but to the hearth. He stood in the middle of the empty space, light from a single street lamp casting long shadows across the floor. And he imagined it. A stove warm and humming. Lily's laughter echoing in the corners. Grace's apron dusted in flower music playing low. The scent of rosemary and garlic in the air. Not just a building, not just a donation, but a beginning. It happened quietly, like most miracles do. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press release, no media coverage shouting "Billionaire CEO gives back." Just scaffolding dust, sweat, and something stubbornly tender beneath it all. The hearth came to life brick by brick. At first it was just a construction zone, chipped paint, cracked tiles, forgotten windows that let in too much wind. But Ethan showed up every day sometimes, in a coat and tie, sometimes in paint-streaked jeans and worn boots that Grace swore he bought just to impress her. Grace was there too, sleeves rolled, hair tied up, hands coated in flour or grout or both. She refused to be the face of anything. I'm not a symbol, she told him. No, he said. You're the soul. She didn't reply. But that night she brought him a bowl of stew without being asked, and he took it as her way of saying thank you. The hearth became more than a kitchen. It was a space carved from the forgotten corners of the city and rebuilt with intention. There were open shelves lined with spices and cookbooks. A chalkboard wall where the weekly menu and handwritten notes of encouragement shared space. A long farmhouse table salvaged from a shuttered diner, now restored and burnished with care. They added a play corner for kids, Grace's idea. And a second-chance pantry stocked with ingredients donated by local chefs who once said no, but now stopped by with baskets of produce and quiet apologies. Turns out, Grace had said one afternoon, people want to give when they're not being asked to atone, but to belong. Ethan remembered that line, wrote it down, framed it. It now hung above the front entrance of the hearth. By the time spring turned to summer, the hearth was ready. The team was small but committed. Grace as head chef and program director. Ethan in the background, still refusing a title. And Lily, of course, who declared herself ambassador of smiles and took the role very seriously. She wore a yellow sash with glitter letters, carried peppermints in her pocket, and greeted every visitor with a hug or a knock-knock joke, some better than others. On opening day, the small hall buzzed with energy. Volunteers who once stood in line now stood proudly behind the counter. Old men who once mumbled thanks now asked for seconds and recipes. Families sat at long tables eating together like it was a holiday. There were tears, happy ones. And laughter, the kind that had been missing too long. Ethan stood near the back coat off shirt sleeves, rolled a soft smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Until Lily darted out from behind the curtain. Wait, she shouted, holding something in her hands. It was a toy microphone, pink cracked and covered in stickers. She scampered up the stage and stood beside him, waving at the crowd like she was on national television. "This is my dad," she said proudly. Ethan blinked. Whispers spread through the room. He felt eyes on him, some shocked, some smiling, some simply curious. Lily pressed on. "Everyone says he's a miracle. But he's not." Ethan's heart dropped a beat. "He's just my dad now," she said, grinning. "I wished for him a long time ago." And guess what? He came. The crowd exhaled a mix of laughter and something deeper. Ethan crouched beside her, eyes misting. "You know what, kiddo?" he whispered. "I think I wished for you too." Later that night, the three of them walked home together through quiet streets, still warm from the day's sun. Their new home, a modest cottage behind the hearth, once a janitor's quarters, was now painted light blue with white shutters, a front porch swing, and pots of rosemary and mint by the steps. Inside the shelves were lined with spice jars, donated books, and crayon drawings of rainbows and soup bowls. Grace sliced apple cake in the kitchen. Lily sat on the windowsill, watching paper lanterns float into the sky, part of the hearth's new tradition, writing down hopes on thin parchment and letting them rise. "That one's mine," Lily said, pointing. "I wished for more hugs." Ethan chuckled, walked over and wrapped his arms around both her and Grace. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, letting out a breath that seemed like it had been held for years. "We used to wish for a miracle," she whispered. Ethan looked up at the sky, watching the lanterns drift higher. "But it turns out," he murmured, pulling them closer, "you were the miracle I never dared to ask for." Outside, the lanterns floated higher. Inside, the warmth was no longer from the oven, but from something far more lasting. A home built not on luck or rescue, but on choice, on love, on staying. 1 year later, the snow returned to New York. But this time it felt different. It didn't sting, it didn't silence. It softened everything it touched, blanketing rooftops and sidewalks, lampposts and windowsills. It curled gently on the edges of signs and smiled through the breath of children running down sidewalks. It felt somehow like a blessing. And nestled on the edge of the city between old buildings and new beginnings stood the Hearth Village. Once just a forgotten brick shell on a forgotten street, it was now alive, buzzing with the hum of second chances. There was a community kitchen where the scent of cinnamon rolls wafted down the hallway each morning. A classroom where older residents taught younger ones how to cook, write resumes, and fix leaky sinks. A shared garden, even in winter, where herbs poked out from insulated planters. And a reading nook lit with soft yellow lamps, where donated books lined the shelves, and someone always left a note tucked inside the last page: "You are loved. Come back anytime." At the heart of it all was Grace. Still moving with the same quiet steadiness, still tasting every pot before serving, still writing the chalkboard menus with care and adding little hearts next to the soup of the day. But now she had a staff, a team, a rhythm. Now, she was no longer surviving. She was leading. And somewhere between the walk-in fridge and the prep counter was Lily, now 5 and unstoppable. She wore a new sash this time, gold and glittery ambassador of smiles. Official. Every morning she greeted each resident volunteer or visitor with a giggle, a peppermint, and a question like, "Do you believe in magic? What's your favorite soup? Have you seen my dad? He's tall and smells like rosemary." On the anniversary of the hearth's opening, the small hall was filled to the brim. Donors, friends, former shelter residents now in stable housing, kids with backpacks full of snacks, volunteers from all walks of life, people who once came for food now came to celebrate. Grace stood backstage, adjusting her apron, heart pounding. She wasn't used to microphones. But before she could take a step, a small blur ran past the curtain. Lily. Clutching her trusty toy microphone, she bounded up the stairs and waved to the crowd. "This is a happy place," she announced, voice echoing slightly. "We have hug soup and no one is cold here." Laughter rippled through the room. Then she pointed toward the side where Ethan stood, looking both amused and deeply moved. She grabbed his hand, yanked him toward the stage. "This is my dad," she said. "He used to be a snowman. Now he's warm all the time." The crowd laughed again, but Many eyes shimmered. Ethan looked at Grace as he took the microphone but only spoke one sentence. We built this because we stayed. Simple. True. The room erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that starts in the chest and spills into the hands. Later that night, the village grew quiet. Inside the small blue cottage tucked behind the hearth, the windows glowed. The table was set for 3 apple cakes, still warm soup pot, still steaming. Lily knelt at the windowsill, watching the sky. Tiny paper lanterns floated upward from the hearth's courtyard, each one scribbled with hopes and names and second chances. I think that one's mine, Lily whispered. I wished for more family dinners. Ethan, standing behind her, smiled and wrapped his arms around both her and Grace. Grace leaned her head against his chest, exhaling slowly. You remember what I used to say? She asked softly. We used to wish for a miracle. Ethan kissed the top of her head, voice warm and sure. And then one night, I found mine asleep at a bus stop. They stood there in silence, watching the lanterns drift higher, like stars learning to rise again. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, love stayed warm. Some stories don't need grand gestures or loud endings. Some begin with a child in the cold, a coat shared, a hand offered without condition. They continue when someone chooses not to walk away. And they last, really last, when people don't show up to rescue, but to stay. This was never a story about charity. It was always a story about family, chosen, built, earned. One bowl of soup, one bench in the snow, one night, forever changed.